Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live to talk about Episode 8 of Star Trek Discovery entitled Vis Pacem Bellum, which translates apparently to if you want peace, prepare for war. And I thought this episode was spectacular. Not only was it a good episode of Star Trek, but it was just a good episode of TV. And I think a lot of that has to do with the writer of the episode, Kirsten Beyer, who I'm most familiar with from her work in Star Trek fiction, most notably the Star Trek Voyager novels Full Circle and Unworthy, both of which I found thoroughly enjoyable. I read some time ago now, and I know she's had her hand in a lot of other Voyager novels and things like that, other Star Trek fiction writing. And they were great. They were great novels, and her her adeptness at characterization came to the fore in this episode for me. Everything was on point about this episode. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And just it had a natural Star Trek feel and vibe, even more so than I think I've gotten in most of the episodes in Discovery thus far. And I have championed the fact that I do get that essence more often than not. But this was, just spectacular. This was like a typical Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise episode, but on a filmic scale. That was my interpretation of it in any case. And I think it's, again, down to the writer, her having a long history writing Star Trek in novel form and things of that sort. And so I have to give accolades for that. I love that they brought on somebody who is so familiar with actual written Star Trek and the depth there and everything like that. The pacing of the episode, the direction of the episode, everything about it, the performances, I have almost no gripes, if any at all. That kind of thing. And it was, somewhat, I hate the comparison between Discovery and the Orville, but both episodes this week knocked it out of the park as far as I was concerned. I was thoroughly riveted and engrossed by both of them. They were both just stellar television, as far as I'm concerned. I'm referencing notes, as you can probably tell, because I had a lot that I wanted to be able to remember that, to get around to talking about. And the first thing that I loved about this episode was the opening space battle. I found it to be somewhat intense, more intense than the space battles we've thus far seen. And I loved the reference there with the USS Gagarin. Of course, Yuri Gagarin, the first Soviet cosmonaut to ever go out into space, out in, beyond the Earth's atmosphere. And that ship, I found it quite interesting that particular, vehicle, that vessel, harkened immediately back to my mind by its aesthetics to the USS Franklin from Star Trek Beyond. And so I'm sure that's going to fuel more of that argument back and forth, that divisiveness. Is this the prime timeline? Is it the Kelvin timeline? Well, that was a very much more Kelvin-looking ship design to a point, because you have to bear in mind that the Franklin was supposed to be a precursor ship to the NX-01 Enterprise, and if we go by that logic, well, actually, it is all prime. Anyway, any which way you want to cut it. So I just find that interesting. I'm not really going to debate that fact. I love the design of the Franklin from Star Trek Beyond because it harkens back to the NX-01 Enterprise, which was another design that I really love. And I like that the USS Gagarin in that opening segment had shades of both, that kind of thing. I like the design of this Discovery as well, but that shot out to me because it looked just like, a little bit more of a merger between the Franklin and the NX-01 Enterprise from Star Trek Enterprise. But because it looks so similar, I was like, oh, hell yeah, that's pretty dope. Unfortunately, that ship is destroyed. No matter what Discovery tries to do, they get in there and they're trying to save them. They don't end up successful, to that end. And they spore drive the hell back out of there. Now, I thought it was interesting, because we're dealing with this episode where Saru is going through this sort of change, and the character that has been going through the most change before that is Stamets, and after their spore jump the hell back out of there, Stamets is back to kind of where we found him when he was first introduced. He's very sort of bitchy and pithy and brass tacks. He doesn't want to mess about. And it's interesting that because he recognizes Tilly, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's just, interspatially verkauft or whatever the word is in his head. Where he says, like, "Oh, Captain, what are you doing here?" Now, is this his perception beyond the temporal realm of her potentially becoming a captain at some point in the future? Because we know that's what she most desires. She wants to, seek that as a career path. The end goal for her is becoming a captain of a ship. Or was he just disorientated and thought he was seeing Lorca for a minute? I don't know. It's kind of akin to the quantum leap effect, which is something I said per his first going into that spore hub drive thing, jacking into that. It reminded me of the Sam Beckett effect from Quantum Leap, the opening of that show. You'd see Scott Bakula, his arms raised, and all the blue and white and everything around him, surrounding him. And of course, one of the problems whenever he would leap into the body, the essence of another human being, be they male or female, even a chimp at one point, he's always disorientated. He always has conflictual, Swiss cheesed, as they called it, memories and things like that. And so because Stamets is perceiving something beyond, the corporeal, perhaps this is our shoe in the door to, like, the mirror universe, which has been touted as being something we will see in the Discovery version of Star Trek. At some point in this series by Jonathan Frakes, I think he gave a tip of the hat to that effect in an interview. And so Stamets might be perceiving other realities, is what I'm getting to. And maybe that reference to, "Oh, Captain, what are you doing down here?" Maybe that's a reference to there's somewhere where Tilly is a captain. Is that the mirror universe where it's evil Tilly? What is that? Is that a future time that she'll become a captain? I don't know, but I found that highly, highly intriguing and engaging, to really find speculatable, that kind of thing. And again, referencing back to my notes, out of that whole battle, though, one of the things that I found very intriguing is, all the Klingon vessels, Cole is giving out, much as was his promise, the cloak. And I love that they call it invisibility screens, a reference back to the original series. They don't call it out now cloak. I think they have in a previous episode. These vessels are cloaking, but I like that they adhered to sort of pseudo-canon in that they cannot fire while cloaked. Because anyone who is even remotely familiar with the Klingons in Star Trek, there was a pretty big deal in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, when there was a bird of prey that could fire while cloaked. That was how it remained hidden. That's all I'll say on that. If you've never seen that particular film, it's one of the best. You should go check it out. But they made a pretty resounding claim of the fact that, this was the first time we've encountered a cloaked vessel that could fire while cloaked, so we're adhering to the rules, sort of, with the fact that the Klingons who were attacking the USS Gagarin were in fact unable to fire while they were, had their invisibility screens up. And so I loved that. I was captivated by that. And as I said about, Saru, the changes of his character, the way he's being influenced are highly intriguing as well. I found that captivating as well. They're on the planet Pavo. It's Burnham, Ash Tyler, and Saru. And this entire planet of Pavo, I found to be mesmerizing and enchanting along classic series, original series Star Trek lines. It immediately recalled to my mind of the original pilot, The Cage, as well as the menagerie that would take chunks out of The Cage and repurpose them and tell a wholly, new story. The planet of Talos 4, which, I'm not going to go too in depth with everything that happens in that. Again, if you haven't seen it, if you don't have the familiarity with either of those, the original pilot, The Cage, or the subsequent two-parter, The Menagerie, I highly recommend you go check them out. But in this particular case, this planet, the entire sort of ecosystem, there's like an essence. There's a living essence on this planet of Pavo. and all of the plants, the leaves are somewhat bluish in color, and they emit a harmony, a musical melody almost. It's very melodious. And of course, that harkens back immediately to my mind one of the opening scenes when the USS Enterprise, as being commanded by Christopher Pike, and Spock is aboard, and you have the female number one and everything like that. They receive an old-style radio distress signal, and they're called to this planet, Talos 4, and when they first beam down, there are plants that have sort of bluish tinted leaves, and there is a harmony, there is a melodious sound, and Spock grips a couple of them, and then it stops temporarily, but then it starts up again when he lets it free, and we actually see Spock smile, like, sharing a smile between he and Captain Pike. So immediately I was thinking of that, and I was enchanted. I was enraptured by that whole... I don't know if that was an intentional reference or not, but it got me into the vibe and the mood of whatever this adventure was, or misadventure was, going to dole out for us. And I loved that. I had it written in my notes. Plants create music akin to Talos 4, harmony, and all that stuff. And subsequently, a later scene, the Admiral, who is being held captive and tentatively supposed to be tortured by the Klingons, she says there is no death penalty in the Federation and Starfleet. And I thought that was interesting because for anyone who has seen the Menagerie, there is a death penalty, or at least a violation punishable by death on the books. And that is anyone's attempting to go back to Talos 4 after what happened in the cage. And so that, apparently that hasn't been put on the books yet. And I just thought that was an interesting footnote in the history of Star Trek, that she pointedly says there is no death penalty, but then if you go back and watch the Menagerie, you find out there is. And that's supposed to be 10 years later. So sometime between now and then, the troubles that Captain Pike runs into on Talos 4 will be something that will become punishable by death if you attempt to go back there. I just thought that was an interesting footnote. As well, in my notes, getting back to the planet Pavo and what Saru and Burnham and Ash Tyler are going through, it really harkened back to me, once again, calling upon the original series of Star Trek, Errand of Mercy. Not only because we have some bold-faced references to House Kor. Cole is under House Kor. I don't know if that's Kor's son or whatever like that. But he is representative of Kor's house, and Kor was the chief Klingon in the original series episode Errand of Mercy. And you had the Organians, which were these incorporeal, but they had taken corporeal form, an alien species, and at least by that point, they had gotten involved. We also see them fleetingly in Star Trek Enterprise as well, in an episode in Enterprise, where they are very much about non-interference. They're about observation. And then they're sort of provoked to reconsider that. And, 100 some odd years later, when Kirk and Spock and all of that, and the Klingons, they all come to a head, the Organians impose themselves on the impending war that is going to escalate all over again between the Federation and the Klingons. And they put a halt to it, the Organians. And so I thought this was interesting. It's almost like a precursor vibe that I'm getting to Errand of Mercy along those lines, because we're dealing with the Klingons. There is a thorough war going on with the Federation. And here, the whole purpose for Discovery's crew people, the landing party, to be there is to try to harness that signal or that signal amplifier, in a sense, use it, a naturally constructed one of crystallization and all this kind of stuff, try to use that to pierce beyond the invisibility screens of the Klingon vessels so they can detect them ahead of time and they can ward them off, for the war effort and all that kind of stuff. And just the way the Pavans, were trying to influence Saru. I mean, you got the impression that they were legitimately trying to affect him, but then you find out toward the end, of course, it was more so, his actions were more so self-guided because the way his species is, the way they have evolved and all that stuff, they are constantly in a state of fear and always running and always, about self-preservation and sensing the coming of death and all those things that they re-reference in the episode. And I just thought it was somewhat captivating that here suddenly he found an equilibrium unlike anything he has ever experienced anywhere else before in his life. It was euphoric to him. Harmony. No more fear. No more, just angst and worry and all of that stuff. He could be calm and relaxed to the point where it's like what some people would, their, the estimation they hold for themselves of, if I won the lottery tomorrow, everything in the rest of my life would be worked out. It would be perfect. That's what we all feel, and just give me enough money where I never have to have a worry again. Bills are always paid. My belly's always full. I'll always have a roof over my head. And this is where he was brought to. And so he destroys their communicators. He's going to strand them there if he has anything to say about it. And because of that euphoria, because of that peaceful quality, and it was just where, like I say, you first get the impression that they're influencing him. The Pavans are influencing him and making him do these things. No, not at all. And that's what makes it tragic but compelling, because you want, for Saru, you want him to be able to be free of all of those reservations and misgivings and fears and things that literally, just direct his life. And I felt for him. I wanted him to have a reprieve, a lasting reprieve, but not, for the sake of stranding them on this alien planet and never to be seen or heard from again. And when they're there, the whole purpose of their being there is the hope of being able to win against the threat the Klingons represent and all that kind of stuff. So the whole momentum of the story and that aspect of it, that he was so changed and affected, even if he wasn't under the effects of the Pavans' influence, like they weren't forcibly influencing him, he was still affected by them. And I was just enraptured by that, to find out, like I say, when the other leg drops at the end of the story, that no, he was doing this of his own volition. He wasn't being forced into things, manipulated into things. It was something he genuinely was willing to die for, to sacrifice all for, just to have this semblance, this equilibrium of self. So pretty heavy doings. Referencing back to my notes, again, touchstoning the Organians and Errand of Mercy and everything like that, with references to House Core and whatever like that. I love that it was a sentiment that was precursor to the original series, and I love all of those really resounding ones, that kind of thing. Calling over, of course, though, to what's going on with the Klingons, we see L'Rell basically persuading Cole that she will interrogate the Admiral who they are holding captive. And I thought this entire exchange was just as down on your knees compelling as what Saru was going through, because she immediately tries to fake out the guard, gets the Admiral to scream like she's being terrorized and tortured and whatever like that, and immediately after the guard walks off laughing. That laugh actually cracked me up. She immediately wants to defect. Cole and these Klingons, they've taken everything from me, even the Klingon who was supposed to fill the place of T'Kuvma ran away, air quotes. Ran away. He was chased away. He's not serving aboard the USS Discovery as Lieutenant Ash Tyler, is he? I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. She wants to get in bed directly with the Admiral, with the Federation, and I found that compelling as all hell. I did not see that coming worth a damn, and I have to beg the question, is there an ulterior motive? Was she genuine that she wanted to be rescued from this degrading sense of the Klingon society that Cole is representative of? He's just about commandeering it all and commanding it all, and he's not about unification as T'Kuvma was? Or is this something that is born out of her pledging her allegiance to T'Kuvma's cause, to align the Klingon houses? Does she figure if she gets herself aboard the Discovery, she'll have an in then? She only has to, reunite with Ash Tyler, who might be the albino Klingon Vok in disguise, as we all speculate, and they'll commandeer the Discovery and turn the tide in the Klingons' favor. I don't know what her motivations were there exactly, but it did give me pause, and I found it highly, highly intriguing. Of course, it fails miserably, seemingly. She's caught escorting the Admiral to an escape pod or whatever. She has a ship hidden somewhere. And Cole just happens to be, it's like he's been observing this the whole time. And so she seemingly pseudo-kills the Admiral. I don't believe necessarily that she's dead. You can survive a shock, an electrical shock. And it seems like that's all she really did. She knocked her out. Maybe she killed her. I don't know. But I didn't get the impression like, oh, that's it. End game. The Admiral's completely 100% dead now. So then she, of course, is brought before Cole and says, but I have this information. I did manage to get this. It's all about Discovery. If you don't appreciate that, well, good day to you, sir, and I'll just whisk myself away. And so he forces her, to the pomp and circumstance, vow yourself to me, out of a sense of humiliation, I guess, because he knows her harboring her vow to Kovma and his cause and all of that. Puts the red war paint on her, and I'm like, oh, this is going to go bad. And this is going to go south any minute now. And sure enough, it does. He calls her on the fact that you think I'm stupid? You think I haven't been aware of your transgressions? You think I'm just going to buy what you're selling me? And then this comes after, of course, we saw that several of her compatriot Klingons had been all but eviscerated. I don't know if this is cannibalistic tactics where they've been feeding off these Klingons, because there's that whole thing that's been drawn into question. I don't believe for a minute that the Klingons are cannibals or eating people or anything like that. They did it the one time, Captain Giorgio, just for the sake of survival, because they were abandoned for 6+ months. It was their only means of survival, and that one time. So I don't believe they're eating their own kind. I don't believe they're eating other humanoids or anything like that. But those bodies were ripped to shreds. And if that's what L'Rell has in store for her, oh, I'm glad I'm anybody but her, that kind of thing. And again, calling back on the idea of the scope of the original series episode Errand of Mercy with the Pavans, for all intents and purposes, realigning their signal so that only two bandwidths can perceive it. Those the Klingons operate and those the Federation operates. So they are beckoning, of course, Cole, the sarcophagus ship, to this point, and that was a hell of a way to end the episode. It was a hell of a cliffhanger. And then I was surprised to find that, okay, because I had been wondering, is this going to be like the finale and then we wait till January, February for this to come back? No, there's one more episode. Episode 9 will be the fall finale, where we will see all of this come to bear, all of this come to a head. And so just wow. Just wow. I just found this to be a stellar episode of Star Trek Discovery, a stellar episode of Star Trek, a stellar episode of television, even though it's not on TV, streaming service, whatever like that, wank wank. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Everything about this episode, the performances were on point. The one thing, okay, if I really have to seek out one minor gripe or one minor bit of confusion, is how did the Pavans know to sort of whisk Ash Tyler to where Michael Burnham and Saru were fighting, right at the base of that giant tower they were trying to sort of commandeer for their purposes? How'd they, it was like a transporter effect. How'd they do that? How are they capable of that? Are they perhaps not Organians, a pre-stage Organian culture set between where they appear on Enterprise and where they later appear in Errand of Mercy? Because that was a pretty spectacular power, and I guess they could observe all, and they knew they had to get him, Tyler, to her. It's interesting. I don't know. It just kind of just happened out of nowhere, and I was like, okay, suddenly he's here. That's the only minor thing that if I had to really seek something to gripe about, to pick out as, okay, there is an imperfection in the episode, that would probably be the only thing. But I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you've made it to this point in the video, here, have a cookie. I wish I had one to give you. But I'd love to hear from you what you thought of episode 8 of Star Trek Discovery. Again, to reference the title, Vis Pacem, para Bellum, which is translates to, if you want peace, prepare for war. And, damn. So yeah, otherwise it'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, I'll catch you all later. Peace.